A widowed king hid in his own castle to spy on the woman he thought he might marry. He used blood magic and mirror spells to see the truth. His heart, already broken by loss, shattered again when he saw her cruelty toward his infant sons. But he also saw something unexpected: the quiet cleaning lady who loved his children as fiercely as their own mother once had. What happened next would change all their lives forever. Lucian Draven stood alone in the forgotten west tower of Obsidian Castle, surrounded by 7 enchanted mirrors that pulsed with crimson light. Each mirror reflected a different chamber of his domain: the nursery where his 3 sons slept, the grand hall where courtiers whispered, the private chambers where Seraphina Vale believed she was unwatched. The blood ritual he'd performed at midnight still left dark stains on his fingertips. He took a slow breath, unnecessary for one who no longer needed air, and felt the weight of what he was about to do. Spying on the woman he'd allowed into his undead heart, the woman his council expected him to marry, the woman who might become queen and stepmother to his heirs, it went against every instinct of honor he'd cultivated over 4 centuries of rule. But something had shifted in recent months. Small things that nagged at the edges of his awareness. The way Seraphina's smile tightened when the triplets cried, how quickly her warmth vanished when no nobles were watching, the subtle comments about how much simpler ruling would be without 3 squalling distractions underfoot. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The princes were barely 6 months old. Aiden, Silas, and Rowan, 3 miracles born in a storm of blood and grief. Lucian had never imagined he'd be raising them alone. For 300 years, he'd ruled the Obsidian Dominion alongside his queen, Evelyn. They'd waited decades to conceive, believing vampiric fertility was a gift bestowed only by ancient magic and perfect timing. When Evelyn finally became pregnant, the entire kingdom had rejoiced. But the joy lasted only until that terrible night when thunder shook the castle walls and midwives ran through corridors with blood-stained hands. She'd given him 3 sons, and then she'd slipped away, her final words a whispered plea he could barely hear over the infants' cries. Protect them. Love them. Don't let anyone unworthy near them. Lucian had buried his queen in the royal crypt and sworn on her tomb that he would rather rule alone for eternity than allow someone false to touch his children. Seraphina Vale had entered his life 4 months after the funeral. Beautiful, poised, a noble woman from a powerful family who moved through court like candlelight, drawing every eye, commanding every room. At first, she'd seemed genuinely charmed by the princes. She'd held them during formal audiences, cooed over them for visiting dignitaries, posted declarations on the castle's message stones about how devoted she was to supporting Lucian through his grief. He'd let himself believe it. He'd wanted to believe that perhaps he could have both: the family he'd promised Evelyn and a partner to share the burden of the crown. But lately, when the court dispersed and the scribes stopped watching, Seraphina changed. Her laughter evaporated. Her patience turned brittle, and Lucian began to suspect that her interest wasn't in the grieving father or the 3 vulnerable heirs, but only in the ancient crown and the power it represented. An old Draven tradition had surfaced in his memories: the Vigil of Shadows, where a ruler disappeared to test a potential consort's true character. His grandfather had done it. His great-grandmother before that. The castle itself held the magic needed: mirrors that showed truth, wards that bent perception, shadow spells that could hide even a king from mortal and immortal eyes alike. 3 days ago, Lucian had announced to his council that he must travel north to negotiate a truce with the Silver Court, a diplomatic mission that could take a full week. Seraphina had been left as the acting lady of the castle, with full authority over the household and nursery. Only the ancient stones and a handful of bound spirits knew the truth. Lucian had never left. He'd slipped through shadow paths and sealed himself in the West Tower, activating magic that hadn't been used since his grandfather's reign. Now, as pale dawn light filtered through the tower's narrow windows, Lucian settled into the throne-like chair carved from black stone and fixed his gaze on the mirror showing the royal nursery. The three cradles sat side by side, each marked with a sigil. Aiden with a silver crescent, Silas with an obsidian raven, Rowan with a thorned rose. Soft blankets embroidered by Evelyn's own hands covered the sleeping infants. Then Rowan began to fuss, a small whimper that quickly grew into a full cry. Within seconds, his brothers joined him, their voices rising in the particular chorus that signaled hunger or discomfort or simply the need to be held. The nursery door opened. Seraphina entered, still wearing the crimson silk dressing gown she favored for late mornings. But her face, the face Lucian had kissed just yesterday before his supposed departure, was utterly transformed. The gentle smile she wore in public had vanished, replaced by something cold and sharp. She stopped in the doorway and stared at the three crying infants with undisguised contempt. "Gods below," she muttered, her voice carrying perfectly through the enchanted mirror. "Not again. 3 of them. Why did it have to be 3? Lucian's hands tightened on the armrests, his fingernails lengthening into claws before he forced them back. He couldn't storm down there. Not yet. He needed to see more. He needed proof that would satisfy the council and silence any political allies she might have cultivated. Seraphina approached the cradles, but didn't lift any of the babies. She poked at their blankets with one finger, checking them as if they were livestock. "You're not wet. You ate 2 hours ago. So, what's your problem now? All you do is scream and demand and prevent me from getting a single moment's peace." The princes cried harder, reaching tiny hands toward her, desperate for comfort. "Especially you," Seraphina hissed at Aiden, whose cries were loudest. "You're always the instigator. If I had my way—" She stopped herself, glanced around as if remembering even walls might have ears, then lowered her voice to something Lucian had to strain to hear. "If I had my way, you'd all be in a monastery by next month. Far away. Forgotten. And this castle would finally be mine." She turned and left, closing the door behind her and muffling the infants' desperate wails. In the tower, Lucian's vision flickered red at the edges. His fangs extended fully, and the temperature in the chamber plummeted until frost formed on the mirror glass. That woman, that creature wearing nobility like a costume, had just threatened his sons. Had just revealed a plot to remove them from the line of succession. But he still forced himself. He needed more. He needed to see everything. The mirror showed Seraphina moving to the great hall, where she poured herself wine and settled onto a velvet couch, picking up a book of court genealogy, as if the crying children 3 corridors away simply didn't exist. 5 minutes passed. 10. 20. The infants' cries grew hoarse and desperate. Lucian was on the verge of abandoning the test entirely when he heard a door open in the nursery corridor, not the main entrance, but the servants' passage. A figure in a simple blue dress and white apron hurried into view. Mara Lorien, the cleaning woman who worked in the castle's forgotten corners and spoke to almost no one. She shouldn't have been there. Her shift didn't start until afternoon. But she moved straight to the nursery, pushed open the door, and rushed to the crying infants with the urgency of someone hearing a loved one in pain. "Sure, my little princes," she whispered, gathering Rowan into her arms first, then somehow balancing Silas against her shoulder while keeping one hand on Aiden's chest. "I'm here. You're not alone. I'm here." And then she began to sing. Lucian's dead heart lurched painfully in his chest. The melody, he knew that melody. It was the lullaby Evelyn used to hum while walking the castle battlements during her pregnancy, the one she'd sung to the newborns in those brief hours before her death. Only 3 people in the entire kingdom had known that song: Evelyn, Lucian, and the young maid who'd been present in the birthing chamber that terrible night. The same maid who now stood in his nursery, tears streaming down her face as she rocked his sons and sang his dead wife's lullaby. The infants calmed instantly, tiny fingers curling into Mara's dress, small faces pressed against her shoulder as if they recognized safety itself. Lucian stared at the mirror, revelation crashing over him like a winter storm. Mara wasn't just a cleaning woman. She was Evelyn's confidant, the one his queen had trusted with her final words, the one who'd made a vow in blood and grief to protect the princes. And she'd taken a servant's position, invisible, dismissed, powerless, just to stay close to them. While the woman Lucian had nearly proposed to sat in the great hall drinking wine and plotting to destroy his family, the woman everyone ignored was the only thing standing between his sons and abandonment. This test, Lucian whispered to the empty tower, his voice rough with emotion he'd tried to bury for months, has only just begun. And no one, not Seraphina, not the council, not even I, is prepared for what it will reveal. By midday, the enchanted mirrors showed Lucian a performance worthy of the finest theater troupe in the Obsidian Dominion. Seraphina descended the grand staircase in a gown of midnight blue silk, her dark hair swept into an elaborate style adorned with silver combs. She moved through the great hall with practiced grace, nodding to advisors, touching arms with just the right amount of familiarity, her smile warm and reassuring. "My lords," she addressed the gathered council members, her voice carrying the perfect blend of deference and confidence. "King Lucian entrusted me with maintaining stability during his absence. I've reviewed the grain reports from the eastern provinces. The harvest projections are promising, but we should increase reserves before winter." Councillor Theron, a vampire nearly as old as Lucian himself, nodded approvingly. "Wise counsel, Lady Vale. The king chose well in leaving you to oversee matters." "I only hope to serve the realm," Seraphina replied, lowering her eyes modestly. "And, of course, to care for our precious princes. They are my constant concern." Lucian watched from the tower, his jaw tight. She spoke of the infants with such tenderness that even he might have believed it if he hadn't seen her standing over their cradles 2 hours earlier, calling them parasites under her breath. The meeting continued. Seraphina made suggestions about trade routes, asked pointed questions about noble families' loyalties, and subtly positioned herself as indispensable. She was competent, Lucian had to admit. Politically astute. Under different circumstances, she might have made a formidable queen. But then the council adjourned, and Lucian shifted his attention to a different mirror, the one showing the nursery corridor. Mara emerged from the servants' quarters carrying a basket of freshly laundered linens. She paused at the nursery door, listening, then slipped inside. The princes were awake but calm, staring up at the mobile of crystal stars that hung above their cradles. "Good morning, little ones," Mara whispered, setting down her basket. She moved to each cradle, checking blankets and adjusting pillows with the careful attention of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Did you sleep well? Your mother used to say that babies dream of starlight. I wonder if you dream of her." She picked up Silas, who'd begun to fuss, and settled into the rocking chair near the window. "Let me tell you about the day you were born," she murmured, her voice so soft the enchanted mirror barely caught it. "There was a storm, the worst in a century. Lightning split the sky, and your mother. She was so brave. She knew what was coming, but she never stopped fighting to bring you into this world." Lucian leaned forward, transfixed. No one spoke of Evelyn's death. The court had collectively decided it was too painful a subject for their grieving king. But Mara spoke of her as if she were still present, as if her memory deserved to live in her son's ears. "She made me promise," Mara continued, rocking gently. She said, "Mara, if something happens to me, watch over them. They'll need someone who remembers me, who can tell them stories when their father's grief makes him silent." A tear slid down her cheek. "I've kept that promise, my prince." Every day, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside were 3 braided cords, silver, black, and red, each tied with an intricate knot. Lucian recognized them immediately. Protective charms from the old magic, the kind Evelyn used to weave. Mara hung one above each cradle, whispering words in the ancient tongue that even Lucian's enhanced hearing couldn't quite catch. In the servants' wing, 2 maids huddled near the kitchen hearth, their voices low. "Did you see Lady Vale this morning?" the younger one asked. All smiles and grace in the great hall. And did you hear her in the nursery at dawn? The older maid countered. I was bringing fresh linens. She was calling those poor babies burdens. Said she wished there was only one, or better yet, none. Hush. If she hears you, she won't. She's too busy playing queen. The older maid shook her head. Thank the old gods for Mara. She's the only one who truly cares for those children. I've seen her skip meals to sit with them when they're fussy. She's more mother to them than that ambitious viper will ever be. Does Lady Vale know? She knows everyone relies on Mara. But whenever the king sent messages asking about the princes, Lady Vale made sure she was the one holding them for the portrait scribes, taking all the credit while Mara scrubs floors. That afternoon, Lucian watched as Seraphina swept into the nursery with a visiting noblewoman, Lady Cordelia from the Western Territories, whose support would be valuable in any future coronation. This is where the little princes sleep, Seraphina said warmly, gesturing around the room. I personally oversee every detail of their care. Mara was in the corner, folding blankets. She kept her eyes down, trying to be invisible. How delightful, Lady Cordelia cooed, approaching the cradles. They're beautiful children. The kingdom is blessed. Indeed. I like to think of them as... Seraphina stopped abruptly, her smile freezing as Aiden began to cry. Then Rowan. Then Silas. Lady Cordelia looked amused. Feeding time? Actually, Seraphina said, her voice tight, the nursemaid was supposed to have them settled before this meeting. You there? She snapped her fingers at Mara. Leave them. I need this space for private conversation. Mara looked up confused. My lady, they need. I said leave them. Seraphina's eyes flashed dangerously. Lady Cordelia and I have important matters to discuss. The crying will stop eventually. But, are you defying me? Seraphina took a step forward, her voice dropping to a hiss that Lady Cordelia couldn't hear over the baby's cries. Know your place, cleaning woman, or you'll find yourself scrubbing the dungeon floors instead. Mara's hands trembled, but she curtsied low and retreated from the room, casting one anguished look back at the wailing infants. In the tower, Lucian's claws pierced the armrests of his chair, leaving deep gouges in the stone. That evening, after Lady Cordelia had departed and the castle settled into twilight, Lucian's attention was caught by movement in one of the auxiliary mirrors, the one showing the rarely used eastern parlor. Seraphina stood with a figure wrapped in shadow robes, the kind worn by advisors who specialized in less savory forms of counsel. The timing must be perfect, the robed figure was saying. The people love him as a grieving father. If something were to happen to the children first, a tragic accident, perhaps, he would be devastated, vulnerable. Then, after a proper mourning period, he would need comfort, Seraphina finished, her voice cold and calculating. Someone to help him through the grief. Someone he already trusts. Precisely. And once you're queen, well, widows remarry all the time in our world, especially when an unfortunate illness strikes. The princes are the obstacle, Seraphina said flatly. Once they're removed, everything else falls into place. The council already sees me as capable of ruling. Then we proceed as discussed. The monastery will take them within the month. They'll be well paid to ensure the children simply fade from memory. Lucian stood abruptly, the movement sending his chair clattering backward. His vision tinged crimson, power crackling through the air around him. This wasn't simple ambition. This wasn't a woman who merely disliked children. This was a plot to murder his heirs. And possibly him. The test had revealed something far darker than he'd imagined. Seraphina wasn't unworthy of the crown. She was a direct threat to everything he'd sworn to protect. And somewhere below, in the shadowed corridors of his castle, a cleaning woman with ancient protective charms in her pockets was the only barrier between his sons and elimination. Lucian pressed his palm against the mirror showing the nursery, where Mara had returned despite Seraphina's orders, rocking all three babies while singing Evelyn's lullaby. Hold on, he whispered to her image. Just hold on a little longer. The reckoning was coming. But first, he needed every piece of evidence locked in these mirrors, irrefutable proof that would justify what he was about to unleash. Lucian couldn't tear his gaze from the mirror. Mara sat in the rocking chair, all three princes somehow cradled in her arms, Aiden against her chest, Silas tucked in the crook of her left elbow, Rowan nestled against her right shoulder. It should have been impossible to hold three infants at once, but she managed it with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this countless times before. The lullaby continued, soft and achingly familiar. Stars above and shadows deep. Guard these souls while kingdoms sleep, moon and magic, blood and bone. You are loved. You're not alone. Evelyn used to sing those words. Lucian remembered watching her pace the battlements during her pregnancy, one hand on her swollen belly, that melody drifting through the night air like a prayer. The wound he'd tried to seal with duty and distance ripped open fresh. 6 months. It had been 6 months since he'd held his dying wife, since he'd felt her blood cooling on his hands, since he'd heard her final gasps between the newborn's first cries. He'd barely allowed himself to grieve. A kingdom couldn't mourn forever. The heirs needed protection. The court needed stability. But watching Mara rock his sons, seeing them peaceful in her arms when they'd been screaming moments before, Lucian felt the full weight of everything he'd lost crash over him like a midnight wave. 6 months earlier, the birthing chamber. Thunder shook the castle foundations. Lightning split the sky in jagged white forks, illuminating the chaos inside the royal bedchamber. More towels, the head midwife shouted. And someone get the king, now. Lucian burst through the door, his formal council robes abandoned somewhere in the corridor. Evelyn lay on the bed, her face pale as moonlight, her nightgown soaked with blood and sweat. Lucian, she gasped, reaching for him with trembling fingers. He took her hand, brought it to his lips. I'm here, beloved. Something's wrong. Her eyes, those beautiful amber eyes that had captured him 300 years ago, filled with tears. I can feel it. The babies are coming, but I don't think I'm strong enough. Don't say that. His voice broke. You're the strongest person I know. You've survived wars, plagues, assassination attempts. This is different. She gripped his hand with surprising strength. Promise me something. If I don't survive this night. Evelyn, promise me. Her voice rose, desperate. Promise you'll protect them. All 3 of them. Don't let anyone near them who doesn't truly love them. Don't let ambition or politics destroy what we made together. I promise. On my bloodline, on my crown, on everything I am, I promise. The midwives swarmed around them. Your Majesty, you need to step back. The first child is coming. The next hours blurred into screaming and blood, and the overwhelming scent of magic and mortality intertwined. The first cry pierced the air, thin and reedy but fierce. A boy, the midwife announced. Then another. Another boy. And finally, as dawn light crept through the windows, a third son, Your Majesty. 3 princes, 3 heirs, 3 miracles. But Evelyn was fading. Lucian knelt beside the bed, cradling her against his chest while midwives rushed around them trying to stop the bleeding. Stay with me, he begged. Please, Evelyn, stay. I can't. Her voice was barely a whisper. But they need someone who remembers me. Someone who will tell them stories. She reached out with a blood-stained hand, grasping weakly at the air. A young maid, barely 20, with dark hair and frightened eyes, stepped forward instinctively. Evelyn caught her wrist, smearing blood across the girl's skin. Your name? Mara, Your Majesty. Mara Lorien. Mara. Evelyn's eyes locked onto hers with desperate intensity. I'm dying. I can feel the veil between worlds thinning. But my sons. She glanced at the 3 swaddled infants being cleaned by the midwives. They need someone. Someone who'll watch over them when grief makes my husband turn away. Someone who'll remember me for them. Your Majesty, I'm just a... Promise me. Evelyn's grip tightened, supernatural strength flooding through her in those final moments. Blood oath, Mara Lorien. Promise me you'll guard them. Protect them. Love them as I would have. Mara's eyes filled with tears. I promise. I swear on my life, Your Majesty. Thank you. Evelyn released her wrist, where a crimson handprint remained. They'll need you. More than anyone knows. Then she turned back to Lucian, touched his face one last time, and whispered, Aiden, Silas, and Rowan. Those are their names. Tell them their mother loved them more than Starlight. And she was gone. Lucian blinked, pulled back to the present by the sound of a door closing in the mirror. Mara had finished settling the princes and was leaving the nursery, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He shifted his attention to a different mirror, one showing the servants' quarters in the castle's eastern wing. Mara's room was barely larger than a storage closet, a narrow bed, a simple washstand, a trunk for her few possessions. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to break. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her hand to her mouth, muffling sobs. From beneath her pillow, she pulled out a piece of faded blue ribbon, the same color as Evelyn's favorite day gown. She clutched it to her chest, rocking slightly. I'm trying, she whispered to the empty room. I'm trying, my queen. But she wants to hurt them. That woman. She wants to send them away or worse. And I'm just a maid. How am I supposed to stop her? She looked down at her wrist, where a faint scar remained. The ghost of Evelyn's bloody handprint, never fully faded despite 6 months of scrubbing floors. You asked me to protect them. I swore on my life. But if she discovers what I know, if she realizes I'm watching... Mara's voice hardened. Then I'll die keeping that promise, just like you did bringing them into this world. She tied the ribbon around her wrist, hiding it beneath her sleeve, and straightened her shoulders. One more day. I can last one more day. And maybe the king will return. Maybe he'll see the truth. In the tower, Lucian stood abruptly, pieces falling into place with devastating clarity. The lullaby, the protective charms. The way she held the infants as if she'd done it since birth, because she had been there since birth. She'd been in that blood-soaked chamber, had received his dying wife's final command, and had carried that burden alone for 6 months. While he'd been drowning in grief and duty, while he'd been courting a viper, while he'd been blind to everything except his own pain, Mara had been keeping her promise. Every day, every night, in silence and invisibility. She'd sacrificed any chance at a better life to stay near 3 babies who couldn't even know what she'd given up for them. And now she was in danger because of him. Because he'd brought Seraphina into their lives. Because his test had allowed that creature to show her true nature. I'm sorry, Lucian whispered to the mirror showing Mara's small room, though she couldn't hear him. I'm sorry I didn't see you. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. He wanted to go to her now. To reveal himself, to thank her, to promise her the world for what she'd done. But he couldn't. Not yet. The test had to run its course. He needed undeniable evidence of Seraphina's plot, enough to justify her exile in front of the council, enough to prevent civil unrest when he cast out a noblewoman beloved by half the court. And that meant watching. Waiting. It meant forcing Mara to face danger alone for a few more days while he gathered proof. Forgive me, he said, pressing his palm against the cold mirror glass. Just hold on. I see you now. And when this is over, I swear, on Evelyn's memory, no one will ever dismiss you as invisible again. But even as he made that promise, dread coiled in his chest. Because the mirrors showed Seraphina pacing in her chambers, discussing timelines with her shadowed advisor. And the timeline they spoke of was rapidly approaching. He had perhaps 3 days before they moved against the princes. 3 days to collect evidence. 3 days to prepare his counterstrike. 3 days to hope that Mara's courage and a blood oath made in a dying queen's final moments would be enough to keep his sons alive. The next morning brought visitors, 3 minor nobles from the southern territories, their allegiances still undeclared in the quiet political dance surrounding Seraphina's anticipated coronation. Lucian watched through the mirrors as she orchestrated the performance with calculated precision. Lord Vesper, Lady Kane, how wonderful to see you. Seraphina glided into the receiving hall wearing dove-gray silk that spoke of tasteful mourning and humble service. I know these are difficult times, with our beloved king attending to diplomatic matters, but the kingdom endures. And the young princes? Lady Kane asked. We've heard such lovely things about how you've cared for them in King Lucian's absence. They are my greatest joy. Seraphina's smile was radiant. In fact, why don't I have them brought down? They should meet their father's loyal subjects. She snapped her fingers at a nearby servant. Fetch the princes. Immediately. Minutes later, 3 nursemaids appeared carrying the infants, but Lucian noticed Mara wasn't among them. The babies looked uncomfortable in their formal christening gowns, tiny faces scrunched with displeasure. Aren't they precious? Seraphina cooed, taking Aiden from the nursemaid and holding him up like a trophy. The infant immediately began to fuss. The future of the Draven bloodline. Beautiful children, Lord Vesper agreed. Strong features. They'll make fine heirs. Aiden's fussing escalated to crying. Then Silas joined in. Seraphina's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Children can be so temperamental, she said lightly, thrusting Aiden back at the nursemaid. Take them back upstairs. Now. The moment the nobles couldn't see her face, her expression transformed into something cold and irritated. She waved dismissively as the nursemaids hurried away with the wailing infants. Where is that woman? Seraphina hissed to her personal attendant. The cleaning woman who's always hovering around them? Mara, my lady? She's in the nursery. Of course she is. Seraphina's jaw clenched. I'll deal with her shortly. 20 minutes later, Seraphina swept into the nursery like a crimson storm. Mara was there, having taken the princes from the flustered nursemaids. She held all 3 against her chest, singing softly while they calmed. You. Seraphina's voice cracked like a whip. Mara looked up, instinctively tightening her hold on the infants. What exactly do you think you're doing? Seraphina stalked closer. I left specific instructions that the nursemaids were to handle the princes today. They were crying, my lady. You only what? Decided that you know better than me. Seraphina's voice rose. You're making them weak. Soft. Children need to learn independence, not cling to some lowborn maid every time they whimper. They're 6 months old, my lady. Mara's voice was quiet but steady. They need comfort and warmth. They need to know they're safe. They need to learn that the world doesn't revolve around their demands. Seraphina's face flushed with rage. You hold them too much. You coddle them. You're teaching them to be helpless. I'm teaching them they're loved. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Seraphina went very still. What did you say to me? In the tower, Lucian leaned forward, every muscle tensed. The temperature in the nursery had dropped several degrees. He could see frost forming at the edges of the mirror, responding to his rising fury. I said. Mara lifted her chin, despite the fear in her eyes. I'm teaching them they're loved. Because they are. Their mother loved them. Their father loves them. And I. You are nothing. Seraphina closed the distance between them in 3 strides. You are a cleaning woman. You scrub floors. You empty chamber pots. You do not presume to educate me on how to care for royal heirs. Then care for them yourself, my lady. Mara's voice shook but didn't break. Hold them. Comfort them. Sing to them. But don't ask me to leave them crying when I have the power to help. Seraphina's hand shot out toward Rowan, fingers curled like claws. Mara turned her body, shielding all 3 infants with her frame. Seraphina's hand struck Mara's shoulder instead, the blow hard enough to make her stumble. In the tower, Lucian surged to his feet, shadow magic exploding around him. The mirrors rattled in their frames. He was half a second from abandoning the test entirely, from manifesting in that nursery, but Mara straightened. Didn't cry out. Didn't back down. You can strike me if it pleases you, my lady. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. But I won't leave these children alone. Not while they need me. Seraphina's eyes blazed with fury. For a moment, Lucian thought she might actually attack again. But she stepped back, breathing hard, and smoothed her gown with shaking hands. Get out, she said, her voice dangerously soft. Take them and get out of my sight. But know this, cleaning woman, when I am queen, You will be the first servant I dismiss. And I will make certain no other noble house in this dominion ever employs you again. You'll scrub gutters in the lower city for the rest of your miserable life." Mara curtsied as well as she could while holding 3 infants. "As my lady wishes." She fled the nursery, but not before Lucian saw the tears streaming down her face. That evening, Serafina summoned the household staff to the servants' hall. Lucian watched through a mirror positioned near the kitchen entrance. "I want to make something perfectly clear," Serafina announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who believed herself already crowned. "There is a hierarchy in this castle. I stand at its apex in the king's absence. When I give orders, they are to be followed without question or hesitation." She let her gaze sweep across the assembled servants. "I've noticed certain individuals who seem to think they know better, who countermand my instructions regarding the care of the princes. This ends now." Several servants glanced nervously at Mara, who stood in the back corner, eyes downcast. "If I learn that anyone has sided with subordinate staff over my explicit commands, there will be consequences. Immediate dismissal, blacklisting, and, depending on the severity of the insubordination." She paused, letting the threat hang. "Well, the dungeons are quite spacious this time of year." The servants shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. "That will be all. Return to your duties." As the staff dispersed, Lucian saw 2 of the older servants deliberately avoid making eye contact with Mara. Fear had done its work. She was being isolated, cut off from any potential allies. Late that night, after the castle had settled into uneasy sleep, Lucian watched Serafina sit at the writing desk in her chambers. She pulled out parchment bearing no royal seal, personal correspondence that wouldn't be logged by the castle scribes. She wrote carefully, her handwriting elegant. The timeline must be accelerated. The king returns in 3 days. The children must be removed before his arrival. Have the brothers prepare the sanctuary. Tell them I will pay triple the agreed amount for immediate acceptance and absolute discretion. No visitors. No correspondence. The princes are to vanish as if they never existed. She sealed the letter with dark red wax, not her family crest, but a symbol Lucian recognized with cold dread, the twisted thorn of the Order of the Crimson Veil, a religious sect known for taking in inconvenient children from noble families and ensuring they never returned. Serafina called for a courier, one she'd brought from her own household, loyal only to her. "Ride through the night," she instructed. "This reaches Prior Malachi by dawn, or you'll wish you'd never been born." The courier bowed and vanished into the darkness. The next morning, Mara was cleaning the great hall when she found a letter that had slipped behind one of the ornate side tables. The seal was broken. Someone had already read it. She glanced around to ensure she was alone, then unfolded the parchment. Her blood turned to ice. It was a response from Prior Malachi. "The sanctuary is prepared. Send the children on the night of the new moon. We will ensure they are never found. The gold has been received." At the bottom, barely visible, was the seal of the Crimson Veil, a thorned rose dripping with what looked disturbingly like blood. Mara's hands trembled. The new moon was in 2 days. She looked up at the empty great hall, at the throne where Lucian should have been sitting, at the castle that suddenly felt like a trap closing around 3 helpless infants. "Please," she whispered to the absent king, to the ghost of her dead queen, to any gods who might be listening. "Please come back. I don't know how much longer I can protect them alone." But the castle remained silent, and the shadows seemed to grow deeper, and somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed, counting down the hours until Serafina's plan would be set in motion. Mara couldn't sleep. The letter from Prior Malachi burned in her memory like a brand. 2 days until the new moon. 2 days until Serafina would try to make the princes disappear. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, when she heard voices in the corridor outside, low and urgent. 3 trunks, no more. We can't draw attention. And the carriage? Arranged. It arrives at midnight on the new moon. The back gate, where the kitchen deliveries come. No one will notice in the darkness. Mara pressed her ear to the door, barely breathing. Lady Seraphina said to pack warm clothing for children. A long journey, she said. Where? Best we don't ask. But I heard her mention a monastery in the northern wastes, where the snow never melts and visitors never come. The voices faded down the corridor. Mara dressed quickly, her heart hammering. She needed answers, real answers, not just fragments of overheard conversations. And she knew exactly where to look. The old wing of Obsidian Castle was forbidden to most servants. Ancient corridors where the stones remembered centuries of Draven rule and whispered secrets to those who listened. Mara had only been there once, 6 months ago, when Queen Evelyn had asked her to retrieve something from the private chapel. Now, carrying a single candle, Mara navigated the dusty passageways. Cobwebs hung like funeral shrouds. Her footsteps echoed strangely, as if the castle itself was holding its breath. She remembered the path, left at the portrait gallery, through the hall of stained glass, down the spiral stairs that smelled of old incense and older magic. The chapel door stood at the end of a corridor lined with faded tapestries. It was locked, of course, but Mara had kept the key Evelyn gave her that day, worn on a chain around her neck beneath her dress. The lock clicked. The door opened with a groan of ancient hinges. Inside, moonlight filtered through a circular window above a small altar. Candles sat in brackets on the walls, unlit for months. The air tasted of abandonment and grief. Mara's candle flame flickered as she approached the altar. Behind it stood a statue of an ancient goddess, the Lady of Shadows, patron of mothers and protectors. At her stone feet lay offerings, dried flowers, a child's wooden toy, a leather-bound journal. Mara's breath caught. She knew that journal. She'd seen Evelyn writing in it during quiet afternoons. With trembling hands, she opened it. If you're reading this, I am likely dead. And if you are Mara, my faithful friend, my chosen guardian, then my sons need you now more than ever. Tears blurred Mara's vision. She blinked them away and continued reading. I've seen the future in dreams, the way our bloodline sometimes does. I've seen Lucian alone, grieving, vulnerable to those who would use his pain against him. I've seen a woman in red who smiles with poison on her lips. I've seen my children in danger. The next entry was dated 3 days before the triplets' birth. Lucian doesn't know, but I've prepared protections. Hidden throughout the castle are charms I've woven with blood and moonlight. In this chapel, in the drawer beneath the goddess's feet, I've left something for whoever watches over my sons, a ward stone keyed to their blood. If they are ever in mortal danger, it will burn hot. Whoever holds it will know. Mara knelt before the statue and found the hidden drawer. Inside lay a smooth black stone the size of a robin's egg, etched with silver runes that glowed faintly in the candlelight. The moment her fingers touched it, the stone flared with heat, not enough to burn, but enough to send a clear message. The princes are in danger.
Now.
I know, Mara whispered. I know, my queen. I'm trying. She turned the page and found one final entry. If Lucian grieves too deeply, if he cannot see clearly, he may resort to the old ways. The Vigil of Shadows, the test of the consort. Our ancestors used it when they couldn't trust their own judgment. The ruler disappears, but watches from hidden places. Mara, if Lucian vanishes on a diplomatic mission and leaves someone else in charge, knows this. He is not truly left. He is watching.
Testing.
And you must hold on until he reveals himself. Mara's hand flew to her mouth. The diplomatic mission. The too convenient timing. The way Seraphina had seemed almost relieved when Lucian announced his departure. He's still here, she breathed. He's been watching all along. But if he was watching, why hadn't he stopped Seraphina? Why hadn't he intervened? Unless he needs proof. Evidence the council cannot deny. Which meant Mara was on her own for 2 more days. 2 more days to keep the princes safe while Lucian gathered whatever evidence he needed to bring Seraphina down. She tucked the journal and the wardstone into her apron, along with several protective charms she found in the drawer, woven silver threads that hummed with Evelyn's residual magic. As she turned to leave, a floorboard creaked behind her. Mara spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure stood in the chapel doorway, one of the guards from Seraphina's personal retinue, his face half-shadowed in the candlelight. "Interesting place for a cleaning woman to be wandering," he said softly. "Especially at this hour. Especially in a forbidden wing of the castle. I was just... Doesn't matter." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Lady Seraphina has been wondering what you're up to. Following you has been quite enlightening. A secret chapel. Hidden journals. You're not just an ordinary servant, are you?" Mara backed toward the altar, her mind racing. "I serve the princes. That's all. That's enough." The guards stepped into the chapel. "Lady Seraphina will want to know about this. Every detail. And I suspect she'll have questions for you. The kind asked in very private rooms, where no one can hear you scream." He reached for her, and Mara did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed one of the heavy brass candlesticks from the altar and swung it with all her strength. The guard stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. It gave Mara just enough time to dart past him, through the door, into the dark corridor beyond. His shout echoed behind her. "Guards, stop that woman." Mara ran through the ancient halls, clutching the journal and the wardstone, knowing that everything had just changed. Seraphina would know she was searching for answers. The guard would report what he'd seen. The new moon was 2 days away, but Mara's time had just run out. The next morning, Seraphina's patience finally shattered completely. "I can't sleep with that incessant noise above my chambers," she snapped at the head butler. "Move their cradles to the east wing, the old nursery near the servants' quarters. I don't care if it's colder. Let them learn resilience. But, my lady, that wing hasn't been heated in months. Did I ask for your opinion?" Her voice could have cut glass. "Move them. Now." Lucian watched through the mirrors as servants scrambled to obey, carrying the 3 ornate cradles down corridors and up staircases toward the abandoned east wing. Mara trailed behind them, her face pale with worry, the wardstone hidden in her apron burning hot against her skin. The procession reached a narrow stairwell, stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. The lead servant, nervous under Seraphina's glare, moved too quickly. His foot caught on an uneven step. Rowan's cradle tilted and began to fall. Time seemed to slow. The cradle tumbled forward, the infant inside too young to even understand the danger, his small body about to be thrown against stone. Mara lunged. She threw herself down the stairs, her arms outstretched, body positioned beneath the falling cradle. Her shoulder struck the steps hard enough to crack bone, but she caught the cradle, twisted her body to absorb the impact, and curled around Rowan as they both crashed to the landing below. Pain exploded through her. The world tilted. But the baby in her arms was crying, which meant he was breathing, alive, safe. The other servants rushed forward, shouting, trying to help, and then everything stopped. The servants froze mid-motion, expressions locked in place like statues. The candle flames in the wall sconces ceased flickering. Even the dust motes in the air hung motionless. Darkness folded around Mara and the 3 cradles like a living thing. When it pulled back, she was no longer on the stairwell. She was in a circular chamber lined with glowing mirrors and carved with ancient runes. And standing before her, pale and terrible and furious, was the man she thought was leagues away on a diplomatic mission. "Your Majesty," Mara gasped, trying to rise despite her injured shoulder. "Don't move." Lucian's voice was raw. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering over her body, assessing injuries with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen battlefields. "You have a fractured shoulder, bruised ribs. You could have been killed. Rowan, the others, are safe. All 3. Lucian gestured to where the cradles now sat in a protected alcove of the tower, the infants strangely calm despite the impossible transition. "But you nearly died protecting them." "I promised your wife I would." Mara's voice broke. "The night she died, she made me swear. I thought I'd failed. I thought you'd return and find them gone or worse, and I'd have broken my vow. You haven't failed." Lucian's hands were shaking as he helped her sit up against the wall. Mara, gods, I didn't even know your name until 3 days ago. You've been the only thing standing between my sons and a monster. You knew. Tears streamed down her face. You've been here? Watching. The Vigil of Shadows. An old test. He gestured to the mirrors surrounding them. I needed to be certain of Seraphina's nature. I needed evidence the council couldn't dismiss. But I never imagined. His voice cracked. I never thought it would come to this. That she would be willing to kill them. She's planning worse. Mara fumbled in her apron, wincing at the pain, and pulled out the letter. The new moon. Tomorrow night. She's sending them to the Order of the Crimson Veil. They'll disappear forever. Lucian read the letter, his eyes blazing crimson. The temperature in the tower plummeted. Ice crystals formed on the mirrors. And there's more. Mara produced Evelyn's journal with trembling hands. Your wife, she knew. She saw it coming. She left protections warnings. She told me you might use the vigil. Lucian took the journal as if it were made of glass. His fingers traced Evelyn's handwriting, and for a moment the ancient king looked utterly broken. She knew I'd failed to see clearly through grief. You haven't failed. You're here now. Because you've been fighting alone. He looked at her with wonder. You took a servant's position just to stay near them. You've endured Seraphina's cruelty, risked your life, kept your promise to a dying queen, and I never even saw you. I didn't want to be seen. Being invisible kept me close to them. Lucian was quiet for a moment then. That ends tonight. Tomorrow, I will return to the castle. I'll announce a grand ceremony. Let Seraphina believe it's her coronation. The entire court will attend. And then I show them the truth. He gestured to the mirrors. Every word she's spoken. Every moment of cruelty. Every detail of her plot. The mirrors preserve memory perfectly. Evidence even the most loyal noble can't deny. Mara's eyes widened. She'll be ruined. She'll be exiled. Stripped of title and magic. Bound by ancient law never to approach my sons again. His voice was steel. But I need you to survive one more day.
Can you do that?
For them? Mara looked at the sleeping princes. I'd survive 1,000 days. Tomorrow night, during the ceremony, stay close to the children. When I reveal the truth, Seraphina may try something desperate. I need you to be their shield one final time. I will be. Lucian placed his hand over hers, cold flesh against warm. After this is over, you'll never scrub another floor. You'll be named Keeper of the Crown Princes, with rank and protection, and everything you should have been given from the beginning. Do you understand? I only want them safe. They will be. I swear it in Evelyn's memory. He stood, drawing shadows around himself once more. Hold tight to the children. This will feel strange. Darkness folded around them again. When it cleared, Mara was back on the stairwell landing, time resuming as if nothing had happened. The servants rushed forward, helping her up, exclaiming over the near disaster. But now Mara wasn't afraid. Because somewhere in the castle, hidden in shadow and mirror light, a king was preparing for war. And tomorrow night, the woman in red would finally face the reckoning she'd earned. By noon, the entire castle buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread like wildfire. King Lucian would return at sunset, and a grand ceremony would follow immediately in the throne hall. Seraphina received the news in her chambers, and her smile was triumphant. Finally, she breathed, turning to her reflection. Finally, he'll make it official. She summoned seamstresses, jewelers, and hairdressers. I want perfection. A gown worthy of a queen. Crimson velvet, the color of power and blood. Jewels at the throat and wrists. And here, she traced a pattern across the bodice, embroidered thorns in silver thread. A reminder that beauty has edges. The servants worked frantically through the afternoon, creating a masterpiece designed to make Seraphina unforgettable. But first, she had one final loose end to address. You. Seraphina found Mara in the corridor outside the nursery, her voice sharp as a blade. I have a task for you. Mara curtsied, keeping her injured shoulders still. My lady, the great hall needs to be scrubbed before tonight's ceremony. Every stone, every corner. I want it spotless. Seraphina's smile was cruel. And you are forbidden from entering the nursery until after the ceremony. The nursemaids will handle the princes. But my lady, they know me. They'll be distressed. That is not my concern. Seraphina leaned closer. In fact, after tonight, it will never be your concern again. Once I am queen, you're dismissed. I'll see you escorted from the castle before dawn tomorrow. Understood. Mara's jaw tightened, but she nodded. As my lady commands. She went to the great hall and began scrubbing, but within an hour, the sounds of 3 infants wailing echoed through the castle corridors. The nursemaids tried everything, feeding, rocking, singing. Nothing worked. Finally, one of the older servants, the woman who'd gossiped in the kitchen days before, appeared in the great hall. The princes won't stop crying, she said quietly. They're asking for you. Well, as much as babies can ask. Mara looked toward the throne hall entrance, where Seraphina's guard stood watch. The back stairway, the servant whispered. I'll keep watch. Mara slipped through the castle's hidden passages, the same routes she'd learned following Queen Evelyn. She reached the nursery through the servants' entrance and gathered the infants in her arms. Their cries stopped instantly. I'm here, she whispered, rocking them gently. Just a little longer. I promise, just a little longer. In the West Tower, Lucian stood before the 7 mirrors, speaking words in the old tongue, the language of blood and binding. The mirrors began to pulse with crimson light, and thin threads of magic stretched from each one, reaching through stone and shadow toward the throne hall below. When he finished, the mirrors would project every memory they held above the assembled court. Undeniable truth made visible. He practiced the invocation once more, making certain every word was precise. One mistake, and the spell could shatter. Or worse, it could spiral beyond his control, releasing memories that weren't meant for public consumption. Justice, he reminded himself. Not vengeance. Show them only what they need to see. But his hands trembled with rage when he thought of what those mirrors contained. In the council chamber, nobles gathered in small clusters, voices low. Do you think he'll truly crown her? Lord Vesper asked. He must, Lady Kane replied. The kingdom needs stability. A queen, an heir apparent already born. It's perfect. Unless he's a doubts, Counselor Theron said quietly. Lucian is many things, but he's not impulsive. If he's taken this long to decide. Seraphina has the support of half the court. Another noble interjected. Even if he has reservations, politically he has little choice. We'll know soon enough. As twilight fell, Seraphina stood before her mirror in the crimson gown, jewels glittering at her throat like captured stars. She looked every inch a queen. In the newly relocated nursery, Mara sat with the triplets, having defied Seraphina's orders one final time. She touched the wardstone in her pocket, still warm, still warning of danger. Whatever happens tonight, she whispered to the sleeping infants, I won't let anyone take you. I don't care if she's crowned empress of the entire realm. You're staying with people who love you. In the shadows near the window, invisible and waiting, Lucian watched her cradle his sons. For the first time in 6 months, he felt something other than grief. He felt hope. Hold on, Mara, he whispered to the darkness. Just a few more hours. And then this nightmare ends. The castle bells began to toll, announcing the king's return. The ceremony was about to begin. The great hall had been transformed. Crimson banners bearing the Draven crest hung from every column. 1,000 candles cast dancing shadows across marble floors. The entire court assembled in their finest, nobles, advisors, guards, and servants positioned along the walls. At the stroke of midnight, the massive doors opened. Lucian entered alone, wrapped in a cloak of midnight black, his pale face stark against the darkness. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator, his crimson eyes sweeping across the assembled crowd. No one dared speak. He ascended to the throne but did not sit. Instead, he turned to face the grand staircase. Lady Seraphina Vale, His voice carried through the hall like a winter wind. "Join me." Serafina descended the staircase like a vision from a nightmare, beautiful and terrible in crimson velvet, jewels blazing at her throat, her smile radiant with triumph. She looked like a queen already. The nobles whispered appreciatively. This was it, the moment they'd anticipated. Serafina reached the throne platform and began to kneel, expecting Lucian to place a crown upon her head. Instead, he raised both hands and spoke in the old tongue. The candles flickered and dimmed. The chandeliers went dark. And above the throne, 7 mirrors materialized in the air, glowing with crimson light. "What?" Serafina's smile faltered. "Behold," Lucian's voice was ice. "The truth you thought hidden." The mirrors flared to life. The court gasped as images appeared above them, scenes playing out like living memories. Serafina standing over 3 crying infants, her face twisted with contempt. "All you do is scream. You're punished, all 3 of you." Another scene, Serafina shoving Mara aside. "You're making them weak. They should learn that the world doesn't revolve around their demands." Another, Serafina with the shadow-robed advisor, their voices clear as bells. "Once the children are removed, he'll be vulnerable. Then we can discuss more permanent arrangements." The letter to Prior Malachi appeared, enlarged for all to read. "The princes are to vanish as if they never existed." "Lies," Serafina shrieked, whirling to face the court. "Illusions. He's been enchanted, someone's manipulating him." But the memories continued. Her cruelty, her schemes, her contempt for the heirs she'd pretended to love. Every damning word she'd spoken in private, now public for all to witness. "It's her." Serafina pointed wildly at Mara, who stood near the wall holding Aiden. "The cleaning woman, she's a witch. She's twisted his mind against me." The nobles murmured, uncertain. Then one final memory appeared, Serafina reaching for Rowan with violent intent, and Mara throwing herself between them, taking the blow meant for an infant. The hall fell silent. "You dare accuse her?" Lucian descended from the platform, each step radiating barely contained fury. "The woman who's protected my sons while you plotted their destruction? I only wanted what was best for the kingdom." Serafina's composure shattered completely. "Those children are distractions. They make you weak. I could have made you strong. Made us strong." She lunged toward Mara, fingers curled like claws. She never reached her. Lucian moved faster than mortal eyes could follow. Shadow and crimson light exploded around him, the full power of the Draven bloodline unleashed. Serafina froze mid-lunge, suspended in the air, trapped in bands of crimson magic that burned like ice. By the ancient law of this dominion, Lucian's voice echoed with centuries of authority. Any who threaten the royal heirs forfeit all claim to title, magic, and sanctuary. "No, please." Serafina struggled against the binding, but it only tightened. Lucian raised his hand, and the magic surrounding Serafina began to pull, extracting something vital from her very essence. She screamed as her vampiric strength, her enhanced senses, her immortality itself were stripped away. When it finished, she collapsed to the floor, human now mortal, powerless. "Serafina Vale," Lucian pronounced, "you are exiled from the Obsidian Dominion. You are forbidden from approaching my sons or this castle for the remainder of your now very limited existence. And should you try," his eyes blazed, "you will discover that exile is the mercy. Breaking exile earns death." Guards moved forward, hauling her upright. She fought and screamed and cursed, but they dragged her from the hall, her cries echoing long after the doors closed behind her. Silence descended like snow. Every eye turned, some to Lucian, standing in the wreckage of what should have been a coronation. Others to Mara, trembling against the wall, still holding the prince in her arms as if he were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Lucian crossed the hall in 3 strides and knelt before her. "You saved them," he said, his voice breaking. "When I couldn't see, when I was blind with grief and doubt, you saved my sons." Mara shook her head, tears streaming. "I only kept a promise. You kept a kingdom." He stood and addressed the court. Let it be known, Mara Lorien is hereby named Keeper of the Crown Princes, with full authority over their care and protection. She will be given rank, resources, and the gratitude of the Draven line forever. The hall remained silent, stunned. Then, slowly, one by one, the nobles began to kneel, not to the woman they'd expected to crown, but to the cleaning woman who'd proven herself worthy of something far more valuable than a title. She'd earned a king's trust, and the love of 3 princes who would grow up knowing she'd risked everything to keep them safe. 3 days after the shattered coronation, Obsidian Castle felt different. The oppressive weight that had hung over the corridors like funeral cloth had lifted, replaced by something cautious and new. Servants moved with less fear, though they still cast uncertain glances at doorways, as if expecting the nightmare to return. It wouldn't. Serafina was gone, exiled beyond the northern borders with nothing but the clothes on her back and the mortality she'd never wanted. But the castle remembered, and so did its king. On the 4th day, Lucian convened a formal gathering in the smaller throne room, not the grand hall where Serafina's downfall had played out, but an intimate chamber reserved for family matters. The council stood in attendance as Mara entered, still wearing her simple blue dress, still looking like she expected to be dismissed at any moment. Mara Lorien. Lucian's voice was gentle, but carried absolute authority. Step forward. She did, trembling slightly. You are hereby granted the title of Keeper of the Crown Princes, with all rights and privileges that position commands. You will have chambers in the royal wing, adjacent to the nursery. You will have authority over all servants who attend my sons. And you will have the protection of the crown. Anyone who threatens you, threatens me. Mara's eyes filled with tears. Your Majesty, I don't need. You need to be safe. Lucian descended from the throne. You need to be valued. You need to finally be seen, Mara. And my sons need you. As if on cue, Aiden, held by a nursemaid in the back of the room, began reaching toward Mara, making the small distressed sounds that meant he wanted her specifically. The council members smiled. Even the most skeptical among them had watched the mirror memories. They knew who had truly protected the heirs. Accept the honor, Counselor Theron said quietly. You've more than earned it. Mara curtsied low, then went to gather Aiden, who immediately settled against her shoulder. The other princes followed shortly after, all 3 gravitating to her like flowers to sunlight. That evening, after the formal ceremonies ended, Lucian found Mara in the nursery. She sat in the rocking chair, humming Evelyn's lullaby, all 3 princes drowsy in her arms. May I sit? He asked softly. She nodded, and he settled into the chair opposite her. A king sitting with a former cleaning woman, both of them watching the children they'd fought to protect. I failed her, Lucian said finally. Evelyn asked me to protect them, and I nearly let a monster destroy them. You were grieving. Grief makes us blind. You were grieving too, but you still saw clearly enough to act. Mara was quiet for a moment. I had a promise to keep. It gave me purpose when everything else felt impossible. She chose well. Lucian's voice was thick with emotion. She chose someone with a courage I didn't recognize until it was almost too late. Thank you, Mara, for keeping a promise I never heard but desperately needed someone to keep. She loved them so much, Mara whispered. Even knowing she might not survive, she fought to bring them into the world. How could I do anything less than fight to keep them in it? The next day, they went together to the royal crypt, Lucian, Mara, and the 3 princes in a small, enchanted carriage that floated beside them, kept warm by protective spells. The crypt was an ancient stone lit by blue witch flames that never died. At its center lay Evelyn's tomb, carved with roses and ravens, her effigy peaceful in eternal sleep. Mara approached slowly, pulled Evelyn's faded ribbon from her pocket, and laid it across the stone hands. I kept my promise, my queen, she whispered. Your sons are safe. Lucian stood beside her, one hand on the tomb. I swear, beloved, they will grow strong and loved. They will know their mother's courage, and they will never face danger alone again. Behind them, a small sound, Aiden reaching out from the carriage, his tiny hand grasping toward his father. Lucian turned and lifted him gently. Silas tugged at Mara's sleeve, wanting to be held. Rowan dozed peacefully, content as long as both adults remained close. "Look at that," Mara said softly. "They need both of us. Then they'll have both of us." Lucian met her eyes. "For as long as they need. For as long as you'll stay. I'm not going anywhere." As they left the crypt, Lucian paused. For just a moment, he thought he heard something in the distant shadows, a whisper of fabric, a breath of malice. Old instincts flared. Serafina was gone, but she'd had allies. The shadow-robed advisor had escaped, and exile, as any king knew, sometimes bred vengeance rather than surrender. The Dravens had survived one threat, but darkness always found new forms. "What is it?" Mara asked, noticing his tension. "Nothing." He forced himself to relax. "Just old ghosts." But that night, standing on the high balcony overlooking the nursery where all three princes slept peacefully, Lucian allowed himself a moment of quiet vigilance. Mara joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "They're safe now," she said. "They are," he agreed. "Because of you." Below them, the triplets slept, Aiden with one fist curled near his face, Silas tangled in his blankets, Rowan peaceful in the middle. Three small miracles, protected by a king who'd learned to see clearly and a woman who'd never stopped keeping promises. The Obsidian Dominion had survived its trial by shadow. And for the first time since Evelyn's death, the castle felt less like a tomb and more like a home where children could grow, where grief could finally begin healing, and where a new family, fractured but fierce, could face whatever darkness might come next. Together. The end.